thankful for the privilege of being here, for having the knowledge of God that we do from the time as long as we can remember. And that's a blessing. Some of my first memories is of my being injured from a car accident and my mother praying for me. I'm sure everyone remembers. Everyone prayed, but I remember my mother because when no one else could make it, she could. But that's a mother, and she had many children. But of course, I guess I imagine initially they weren't sure if I was going to make it. And I remember looking through the hospital window as it rushed me to the hospital and seeing my mother outside. So I guess she came in between the visits. I would stand and pray for her little baby girl. I guess I was the baby at the time. And I thank the Lord for some of those memories. It helps us to know how to carry a burden for those whom we love. And she would tell me at the time when she actually got there, they told her that, well, your daughter's lost so much blood, we can't even test to see what kind of blood she has. So she said she asked the Lord to give me blood. And the Lord blessed. She said they were finally able to test my blood. But as a child, there were stories that were amazing because I was there able to jump and run and play. I do remember I used to often do exercises, and I learned later that, I learned somehow, I don't know at what point, or I had a sense that those were exercises they suggested to strengthen my body after such a serious accident. But most of all, God allowed me to live, and we thank the Lord for that. Appreciate that. Our thoughts are, and I desire the Lord to bless it. I've shared this also about how God teaches us. And many times we think that the main thing God teaches us is moral lessons, and He does. But if we allow God, and we ask Him even, there are many basic things that He'll teach us. Yeah. And it's amazing how He will do that and how He's aware of the world we're living in. We thank the Lord for His credentials and that He was willing to go through some things so that He could persuade us. He didn't have to persuade Himself, but persuade us that He knew and He cared. That He's concerned about how we function in the world we're in. And God is sensitive to our behavior, our spirit, our spiritual well-being. Yeah. This affects God. Yeah. And when God created man, women, and began to populate the earth, God's desire was for us to honor Him. And in the time that passed, from the time He created man and woman to the time of Noah, God was grieved at the behavior of men and women. He was just grieved. And He began to teach Noah. Noah was a man of God. And in the Old Testament, obedience was equated as righteousness. Yeah. In other words, Jesus hadn't come, but if we were obedient, God equated that as righteousness. And Noah was one of those men. We thank the Lord for persons like that. And God looked on and perceived that not only was the world wicked, but getting more wicked. Yeah. And He began to look around to see who was following God. And He realized Noah was that man. And when we understand that God took Noah after he followed all the precepts that had been passed down to him, God took him and used him as an example to those that were yet living. And And from the time, well, I feel like most of us, from the time we were quite young, we know the story of Noah because, for me, it was fascinating. It dealt with animals and how he had to say that, let's bring the animals in. Of course, we have a few little animals, excuse me. We have several animals now. But we have dogs, we have St. Bernards, and we have some Great Dane mix. A couple of those are my daughter-in-law. But my son and Cisco have several species of fowl, from chickens and ducks and what have you. Because my son was saying to me, "Oh, I'm so excited because I'm going to eat a duck egg this morning." I said, "It's all right." But the point I'm saying is that we're fascinated if we have one or two animals or whatever they are. And have we ever stopped, I hadn't, stopped to think about that what allowed Noah to eventually bring all those animals in the ark? Well, I've known the story for years. I've read it as a Bible story, but I hadn't quite noticed. But let's begin reading in the 6th chapter of Genesis. Our burden is how God can teach us, which will guide us in the direction and to do the right thing. Cisco, do you write on the board? Can't you write on the chalkboard? Yeah, it's a learn. No, a writing. I need some words written.
Yeah.
Okay. Do it like, let's see, in the middle is fine. When we are in need of God's leadership, many times we think, well, He'll teach us how to be patient, and He'll teach us how to have more grace. But have we ever thought about what He taught Noah? And He can teach us in this generation. Many times we think it's all left to the world we're living in, but all of the subjects that He's writing on the board for me is what God taught Noah. We feel like when great scholars down through the centuries evolved and developed certain precepts, that's when it evolved. But God taught all this to Noah. And when we understand that, then we realize God can teach us and guide us in our particular situations that may be different than other people. God can teach us and guide us as His trusting children in particular ways that maybe the rest of the world hadn't thought of, may not be aware, but we need His guidance. And God just put it right over here. One word on that. God is pleased to support us, pleased to guide us. And what's important is that we are God's child, that we are trusting children, that we are concerned about those things that please God. And when we do that, God is particularly concerned about us. I remember, thank you, they have a children's book. I guess they still have them. But when my children were young, and maybe before that, they had a children's series called Encyclopedia Brown. Does anyone ever remember hearing of that? And I remember reading it probably along with my children or something. Or maybe I was younger. Whatever the case, I remember thinking, boy, Wouldn't that be amazing to have a machine that could do your math? That's amazing. And of course, the machines that they suggested in Encyclopedia Brown was probably something about the size of a refrigerator or two. And it could process math. I thought, boy, I wouldn't have to do all this math. But anyway, it was okay. I was my mother's daughter, and she didn't play. She didn't. And she'd sit there and she'd, okay, let's do the math. My children are in awe now because I can add up. I've shared this before. When I'm checking out, I can add about as fast as the person checking out. But I didn't appreciate it at the time. And she said, oh. And she'd say, ought. We always said zero, but they said, ought. What is ought? And I said, what is ought? I wasn't saying it out loud. I was saying it to myself. What is ought? Why does she keep saying ought? But the point is thought, if only there was such a machine. Well, since that time, in the last 40 years, there are thousands of machines. They have machines to do everything. To the point, what was that, in the last, I guess, 20 years, when they had that grid that went out in the northeast, I think they said 1/5 of the United States went down, and nobody could add, because they'd all used cash registers. They couldn't add in their head. I'm sure if they had a chance to piece of paper and they could go through it, they'd probably do that. But you had long lines and what have you, people needing things. But that wasn't an option when my mother was raising me. She made me, and I didn't consider myself a mathematician. I was just doing what was required of me of my mother. And so often when I'm in the line, and then I'll say, excuse me, how much did that cost? Oh, it said so. I said, well, I don't think that's quite the right total. So I'm not often wrong. One time in particular, our store, they've taken that sign down now, but they had a sign up that said, if your product is miscalculated or mischarged or whatever they had, you'll get it free. Right. And I said, that's not the right price. And he got so out of sorts. You, what? You could come up here and get everything free. I said, no, not everything. Just the things that you make the error on. And so I think he was just agitated that in my head I was being the cash register. But whatever the case, because I do it, it's not something conscious, it just happens. Because when I pick it up on the shelf, I want to know the price and what I get it for. So then when they ask, I remember that price, and I also know how to round. And so I'm within a few dollars, so I'll know before I get up there whether I have enough money. So the point is these are the times we're living in. Now all of this that I've told you has happened in the many centuries since Noah. But God taught Noah, what do I have up here? Not math, physics, science, biology, zoology. God taught him all of these things. This man who was righteous, God taught him those. And if, it's up to you, but if when I'm reading, you notice one of these subjects here that we're reading about, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. So, well, that's zoology, or that's physics, or whatever it is. And the point is that God taught this to Noah. Thousands and thousands, you see? And many times we just feel like God, religion, and all of that is so outdated. But this is what he taught to Noah. Okay, let's begin reading. In Genesis, we'll begin at the 5th verse, 6 and 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, grieved him at his heart. The Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping things, and the fowls of the air, for it repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And this is the secret, both then and now. To be guided by God. The secret is to find grace in the sight of the Lord. These are the generation of Noah. Noah was a just man. And let's take note of the 9th verse. And perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So we are in a time when we are faced it used to be, we'd say every century, and then we'd say every decade, but now it's every few months. There are new developments that will tax us, that will try us, that will cause us to seek to make the right decision where it's concerned. And God is just the same then as he is, just the same now as he was then. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God. Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh, and corrupted his way upon the earth. God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. I guess that was probably whatever was prevalent at that time. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, because wood has a ability to function for a long time, and we'll see what he did to preserve it. God said unto him, let's read that again. The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, shall pitch it within and without with pitch. That's an old-fashioned term, but what will we classify pitch as? Tar. Yes. Yes, he said, you want to put what we would call tar, shall pitch it within and without with pitch, and that was sealed. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, the height of it 30 cubits. And I had read that many years, and I thought that's an old-fashioned measurement. And it is, but it had a general measurement, and that is a cubit was the length from a man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger. And the average man's length of that was 17 to 21 inches. And so we can have a visual of what that was. In other words, the truth of it is, I'm inclined to think, and I haven't done any research on this, but the scripture says that before the flood, persons lived 600 to 900 years. Yeah. So I wonder how long they grew. We figure the average man stops growing at the latest 21 years old, and the average woman probably a little younger than that. But so what was to stop them from growing just a little taller? So we can say that possibly they were from the elbow to the tip of his finger was probably about 21 inches. And if it was 21 inches, let's see here. He said, make thee an ark, gopher wood, room shalt thou make in the ark, and shall pitch it within and without with pitch. This is the fashion which thou shalt make it. Of the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. The breadth of it 50 cubits. So 300 cubits means that the ark was about 525 feet long. And that was in Noah's time. That would be the equivalent, especially when you see it's 3 stories tall, of some of these structures that we consider substantial structures. And the Lord taught him physics in order to create that kind of structure, math and physics. And it said, breadth of it, in other words, was 50 cubits. And so you multiply that, and you understand it's a pretty good size width. In other words, 50 cubits would be probably about, let's see, 50 cubits The width of it was probably over 100 feet, maybe between 100 and 150, depending. And it said, and the height of it, 30 cubits. And so, when you visualize the size of this dwelling, you realize that God was teaching Noah both math and physics, and that was in his time. Now, we don't know that that's something God teaches. We just figure out, I just want a good calculator. And I want a good, math machine. And I can do it. But God taught this to Noah. And when you understand that, then we realize that God is not backward. All of the developments and all of the calculations that man has developed, he can do it to a millimeter. My husband, you've heard him tell it, how when he would make, they were building that big skyscraper. I think the highest they went was 70 stories. They said they can't be off. Because even if it's a 16th of an inch, by the time you get to a certain height, it is way off. And inclusions in it, and the way they address their inclusions inside the wells is they x-ray or ultrasounds like they do with mothers and their babies to see if there's any inclusion. So that was my husband's trademark. He didn't rush, but you had no conclusions because he would weld a while and then he'd check it to see if there was any, and he'd brush it. He had a wire brush and make it clean and make it the next well. And his motto was, when I weld something, it's going to break somewhere else, but my well will not break. That's how much confidence he had in his well. Well, he was a man, but God taught Noah. God was concerned about the structure. And when we consider that historically and biblically he worked on it 100 years, you can imagine what people were saying, that he's not real smart, or we're just tired of him telling us we need to change our ways, and what does he know about it? But the secret was, it said, he was perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. And this is our privilege and our secret, and this is our guide in helping us to do the right thing. This is our guide. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. And so when we visualize this now, in the perspective that could possibly be 525 feet long, a few stories tall, and many yards wide, we understand that God directed him. These are the instructions God gave him. Behold, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant. Covenant is like a truce or a contract. I establish my covenant, and shalt thou come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark. Now this is where the zoology come in. In other words, he was going to be dealing with many, many animals. And it was just fun to think about. Because we don't have to stand next to the lion and the anteater and whoever else is coming in, but just think about those animals and say, oh my, that's amazing. But we haven't stopped to think that, as far as we know, it was only 8 individuals. Yes. But God was guiding him in all of these fields that we're speaking of. Yes. And math, physics, science, biology. Because in addition to bringing all the animals, they had to bring food for all the animals. Yeah. And everybody didn't eat the same thing. Right. And every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort that shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Of fowls after their kind, cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing on the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive. In other words, when we're giving you that responsibility, take thou unto thee all food that is eaten, thou shalt gather it to thee, shall be for food for thee, for them. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. And as we said before, the secret is Noah was perfect in the sight of God. That means he was obedient. He was obedient. Did we follow that? And so that was a dividend that God blessed Noah with. In spite of the times he was living in spite of the difficulties that he might face, he was obedient to God. And by being obedient to God, he could receive these instructions. Because if he wasn't obedient, he could have been like, oh, nobody's ever done that before. I've never heard of anyone building. The most they had, the ships were probably a little longer than this room, maybe twice as much, but not 5 times, not 6 times the length, width, and height. And God taught him all of these sciences at that time. When we understand this, then it just in a practical sense teaches us that God can guide us in this generation. God can direct us in this generation. And when we realize that the specificness of God, it helps us to understand who God is, and that if we listen to God, he can guide us to do the right thing. Because there are many stubborn people in the world, and it's not just teenagers. And I'm just saying the world we're living in, people that feel like they can defy God and every other principle there is. But when we seek to hear God, he can guide us the way we ought to go. Yes, thank you, Lord. When I was a little girl there in Bakersfield, I don't know what year it was, but we were in the country, so I was probably under 10 or 11. I might have been 7 or 8. And it began to rain. We had a gravel driveway. And it began to rain. In other words, we didn't have a sidewalk or whatever. Very large front grassy yard. And I was so frightened. I thought, oh, this rain quick. And I thought, I wonder is it going to rain until we just get washed away. I don't know. I think we had Bible stories then, so maybe I knew the Bible story where it's rained so heavy and then the Lord said, but I won't destroy the world again with rain. But, I was beginning to wonder about that. I was frightened. It was raining so much. We don't have those every year now. Now, in the Midwest, they're having that in the East, but they, up until these last 2 or 3 years, they didn't have that every year either. So anyway, but he said, I won't destroy it again with water. But we want to notice, and our emphasis is, that by Noah being perfect in the sight of God, this is what directed him where he was able to do the right thing. Now, 7th chapter. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou, all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all the Lord commanded him. Now, God directed him as a weatherman as well. You don't have that up there. But my grandfather-in-law, Brother Grope, when they were going through his papers after his funeral, he had a certificate from the weather station there where he lived for his participation in helping them cast the weather. And my husband told them they would be out in the field and they'd have so much. He was a wheat farmer from the time he was 18 till he said 64. He never And so he could look at over at the clouds and say, okay, we have, and he might tell it was an hour or 2 hours, we have so much time to plow, and then we got to get in. And so he would plow up to the time, and he, I guess, would call the weather station and tell them what they saw. So they, in his papers, were certificates suggesting appreciation for his participation. So he could read the weather, and the Lord taught Noah certain principles as well. Now, we may not have physical weather that we have to look at, but God can direct us in a spiritual manner. There are places and times that we need to be aware of. But he was a righteous man, so God had direct communication with him. And Noah, at 5th verse, and Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, of fowls and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of the heaven were opened. Now, I had known the story of Noah probably all my life, but I remember when we were visiting Grandpa Droke, there was a heavy rain that year. And he lived out in, I thought I could say that name. It's not in it, it's out from in it. And he says, you know, those waters, I'm trying to talk like him, the waters were coming from the sky and from the earth. Since when does water come up from the deep? But the scripture says that's what was going on here. He said, yes. He said it was so much water, it was coming from below and coming from above. And I didn't realize the scripture said that, but that's what he said was going on. In other words, there was so much water. Did you say something, Brother John?
Dover.
Dover? Is that where?
I was wondering if that's where he lived.
I'm just wondering if that's where he lived. I think they lived in Dover for a time and then moved to that other little town. But Dover was, no, I don't think it was Dover. It was, I guess it doesn't start.
Several towns out that way.
Yes, it is. It was 27 miles from Enid, but I still can't. And I still remember that because I said, you mean water was coming up from below and from above? But it said, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. The rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Where we live, we have what we call the Mojave River, and I would say 80-90% of the time it's dry. But when we have a real wet year, you can go by there and it's flowing. And they said, but it flows underground most of the time. What? I never heard of that. Just flow underground. And then when enough it comes up, it's a pretty wide stretch width. Anyway, and they went in unto Noah. And they all went in. Let's see. 16th verse. They went in, male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Now that's kind of fascinating to me. The Lord shut the door. His obedience to God, he didn't say, you know what, I don't know how you can protect us, and so I don't know if I want to get in that ark. But he was perfect, and he walked with God. And God shut the door. And I wonder how big that door was. For all those animals to be able to go in, as well as the men and women that walked the earth. Because as I said, we don't know how tall they were. But they were at least 21 inches from the elbow to their, and that's 2 feet, almost 2 feet. Not 2 feet, but almost. God shut the door, and the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. The point is that big long ship, we would call it, it was so much water, it lifted it, it started floating. That's amazing. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beasts, of every creeping thing that creepeth on the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died. Every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. Noah only remained alive, and they were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. When we understand that the beginning of this was Noah was perfect in his generations. In other words, he walked with God.
Yeah.
So that inspires me to believe that in our technical generation, and there are many places, in other words, any device created, someone is seeking to destroy it. And we have so much automation in our vehicles now, and there are people that can breach computers and actually take over your vehicle. And so this is the times we're living in. And God prepared for this day, and our secret and our protection is walking with God. Having his direction, if he could teach all of this to Noah, then he can guide us in this generation.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we don't seek to have knowledge of the mechanics of life, but God can be an ever-present guide and director in our lives. And when we understand this, that God destroyed all of them, Noah remained alive, and this is the 23rd verse, and they that were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. When we continue the reading, Noah, well, let's read the 8th chapter, and we'll read the first 8 verses. God remembered Noah and every living thing, all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped. The rain from heaven was restrained. The waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. The ark rested in the 7th month, and on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountain of Ararat, the waters decreased, continuing until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. Now, do we register how long they were in the ark? Almost a year. But God gave him a calculation for food for all the animals, for all the people, for the size, for the temperament, for the temperature, and then shut the door. But God taught all this to Noah, and Noah was able to receive it because he was walking with God. And we are living in a time now that there are so many places that people are seeking to destroy. We heard in the news just the other day, a youngster, they think was on the internet, and befriended a couple of college students, and she lost her life. Don't have all the details. This isn't the first time. It's far more than we realize. Because we have children who are not subject to their parents, and sometimes parents don't see the need. Oh, what's wrong with that? Going on the internet. But many children are compromised. And this got national news because maybe she had some physical condition. I think she had a kidney transplant or something. That may be it. But many of our young people are not walking with God, and their parents either. And so they don't understand that God can be their guide and their protection. But he is yet available to guide us, to help us do the right thing. God is available to do that. And if we are listening, he can guide us to do the right thing. But we're listening. So, well, you don't know where I am. Well, there's a lot of people that didn't know where Noah was, but Noah knew who God was. And he listened. And the waters decreased, continued until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. It came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. He sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her feet, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her, pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. The dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. He stayed yet another 7 days, sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. It came to pass in the 600th, the first year, the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. All this wasn't through radio waves, it wasn't through a computer tower, but it's through God teaching him all the sciences, all the methodologies of animal and beast. God directed him. And I don't know which verse it is. I don't know if I know this. But I says, okay, this is the answer. After the flood, then God made a division between man and beast. It wasn't there before. And that's why he was able to bring all those animals in. But after that, God said there will be a division between them. And therefore, we understand this now. And if I note that again, I meant to, and I'm sorry I didn't. But I said, oh, so that's what happened. In other words, but this was all directed by God, teaching Noah and his family what should and should not be. And when we understand that God trusted Noah by his directives to impact all the known world at that time, because he walked with God. Because through his hearing and listening to God, he was able to do the right thing. He was able to be guided by God. He was able to understand all of these many sciences that some people spend a decade to master. God taught Noah, and while he was teaching them these sciences, he also built the ark. And evidently it was just right, because God was able to shut the door and seal in, and they lived. And so they were in there almost a year. Well, we want to be guided by God, to develop our spiritual listening ears, develop a heart that will receive instructions from God. And God is able to do that for us individually. We're living in a time when we need directives from God. We need to be guided by God. We need to have experiences that God can give us instructions even before those that are perpetrating it. He can guide us in those places. We will be challenged, but if we keep our heart right before God, God will guide and protect us. God is able. I'd like to turn to Matthew, the 2nd chapter. And in this, well, before we go to Matthew, let's go to Samuel. 1 Samuel 3 and 4. We know the story of Samuel. It was one of my favorite stories. As a matter of fact, the reason it's so precious to me, the Lord brought it to my understanding when he called me to the ministry. Because as I was praying and living and seeking the Lord, I remember the Lord gave me a specific laid out message. I didn't call it a message. I just thought that's a wonderful thought, and I was touched by it. And then he gave me another one. And I was touched by that one. And when he gave me the third one, he brought to my attention that that's what I did with Samuel when I called him. I called him 3 times. But anyway, Samuel, 1 Samuel 3. And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see, he was going blind. And ere the lamp of God went out of the temple of the Lord, it was not a spiritual time, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep. Now, again, in my mind, Samuel was a youngster, 10 or under. The Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. And he ran unto Eli and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not. This is the 5th verse in the 3rd chapter of 1 Samuel. I called not. Lie down again. He went and lay down. The Lord called yet again, Samuel. Samuel arose, went to Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not. My son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the 3rd time. And he arose, went to Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. Eli perceived that God had called the child. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood and called at that other time to Samuel, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. And the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel at which both the ears of everyone that hears it shall tingle. And when we understand there was wickedness that had come to the temple of God and to the society, and God was using the time to direct him. But when we listen to God, he can direct us. He can guide us. Now let's turn to Matthew the 6th chapter. And that was in the Old Testament. Now in the New Testament, we are dealing with some of the scriptures we probably have read in recent times because of this Christmas season. But I particularly am moved that these were men of scholars. These are scholarly men. Matthew, 2nd chapter. We'll begin reading at the 1st verse in just a moment. This is the story of what we call the wise men. Again, God had all the knowledge that they had and then some. God created an environment that they could follow. In other words, it had been historically written and prophesied that someday a Messiah would come, and various suggestions. And this is significant because there were 3 different wise men. They were called kings, probably kings of the city-states. 3 different ones from different areas. But they all were men well-versed in sciences and astronomy. I think we have astronomy up on the board. Well-versed in astronomy. And they studied it all the time. And they also read the ancient books because this was part of their God. But coming into that equation was God talking to mankind. So let's begin reading at Matthew, the 2nd chapter, the 1st verse. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests, scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. They said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor, that shall rule my people, Israel. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search diligently for the young child. When ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. Now, any of us that had an audience with the king or the president, that would be pretty impressive. And he said, And please let me know so that I can come worship him. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till the king stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. When they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, many things in today's world, we feel like they're accessible, but there were certain parts of the world that had access to some of these, and it took money, time, and connections to have them. So these were men of great means and intellect. But, that's what the 12th verse saying, and being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. In all of that knowledge, they still were men who listened to and honored God. And that was their protection, because during that time, Herod sent out and was killing all little children from age 2 and under, same as they did in Egypt. But because they were men of God, they didn't go back to Herod. They went another way. And there are times and places that God will direct us. And it's better than internet. It's better than cell phones. It's better than GPS and everything else, because it is a direct connection with us and our situation. So our role and our burden and our focus is to get close to God.
Amen.
To be willing to hear and obey. So in 2016, with all the many intricate traps that are being set, God can still direct us and guide us. And the key is to being one that walks with God. And when we realize the faithfulness of God, we realize that God has made a way in every decade, every century, that He can speak to His own, that He can guide His own, that He can direct His own. It's important for us to be willing to listen. Because there are people who say, oh, going to church is old-fashioned, listening to God is old-fashioned, because you have so much in your hand, you feel like you can solve it, right? You feel like, matter of fact, whenever I come in here, I check my weather on my phone to see if it's going to be warmer. You all are warmer than we are where we live. Our nights for the last week have, I think, all been freezing. And our days up until today was probably in the 40s. But in here it's been a little warmer. But the point is that we are, in this time of so many things, God still reserved a connection between Himself and His trusting children. He reserved that connection to guide and protect our soul, that we might do well. And another story I'd like to share is the story of the little boy with the fishes and loaves. That's over in Matthew, the 14th chapter. I'll talk about it. That little boy, Jesus, had now reached the age of 33. He left his father's house and helping him with the carpentry, and began to travel and preach the gospel. And the word went around that he was going to be outside a nearby village out on the mountainside. And they said there were 5,000 men, let alone women and children. So Egypt has been between 5,000 and 10,000 people, I think. And this little boy, who was probably a lad, probably someone about 9 or 10 years old, I imagine he got up that morning and he said, I'll call him Mommy. I don't know what they call their mothers, but he said, Mommy, I'd like to go hear this prophet speak. His mother said, okay, take your lunch. I have some loaves and fishes, and 3 loaves and 2 fishes, and I'd like you to take it. And so when Jesus said, they said, all these people are hungry. He told the prophet, his disciples, they're hungry. He said, oh, just let them go to the nearby village and get something to eat. He says, no, they've come this way. And the little boy, who had obeyed his mother and taken his lunch, offered it to the disciples. Now, he was looking in his own sight, and who knows, the disciples probably felt it but didn't say it. Are you crazy? What do you think these 2 loaves and these fishes can do to these people? But he offered it because he obeyed his mother and taken it. And Jesus took it, and they fed all of them, all the men is what made that happen. I love that story because there was an obedient child.
Yeah.
And the disciples, they just said, we don't have enough food. And Jesus blessed it. There are things in our lives that we don't have the answers to, but we want to walk close to God. And I don't have the full answer of what the Lord's going to work out, but I'm looking to Him to do it. But as you know, a year ago, well, not quite a year, but close to a year ago, we were in a acute situation with our congregation and with our chapel, and we were doing much praying and fasting that the Lord would make a way for us. And I think I must have put the request in Fresno when I was there, and then we went back for something. I don't know if we went back for the following meeting, but a dear brother came to us and said, Sister Alice, oh, I know, we were waiting for a letter for them to tell us whether we would have an extension or not. And he approached me and said, Sister Alice, did you ever get a letter? I said, yes, we got a letter, and thank you for asking. I said, we got a letter, and they extended it for 3 years. And I said, we told him, my daughter and I, we said, we consider that a miracle.
Yeah.
Well, the point I'm saying, some people assume when I pray like that I'm ignorant of the facts. Not ignorant of the facts. I just know that God is God. And I was looking to Him to supersede all the facts. When we follow God, He gives us that privilege in particular circumstances. And I share that. It's not that the odds don't look good, they don't. But we're looking to God. From our perspective here, thousands of years later, what do you think of the probability of Noah succeeding with an ark? But he walked with God. And if Noah looked over here, he'd want to know, how do they navigate the world with all those people in it? We walk with God. And we do that because by listening to God, He guides us and gives us the privilege of doing the right thing. When we listen, He will direct in our particular circumstances. There are other people that say, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. If it had been me, I would have done so-and-so. Someone told me, it's just time to let it go. I didn't try to explain anything to them, but I sure talked to God about it. And I think one of the things that the superintendent of the church that we purchased our church from, he says, how do you put it? Your spirit is like ours, and we want you to succeed. And I don't know how far that'll go or what it'll do, but we're still walking with God. And we're still looking to be guided by Him. And the most important thing to God are the souls of men. And when we have that, all the blessings of God extends to whatever else is touching our lives. And there are situations, and I was so touched by that brother. Sister Alice, did you get the letter? And we said, yes, we did. And we thank the Lord. And I remember now, because I was late to the meeting, waiting every day to hear the letter. Because if we got a letter and said, we want you to cease and desist at once, I needed to be there to help empty the church. So it was that close a situation. And so I didn't leave until I spoke to him on the phone. He said, I'm sending a letter. But anyway, the point being, we're living in a time when God wants to guide and direct us. And the secret is to walking with God. He said Noah was perfect in his generation. So whatever our generation is, if you explained it to my father, although my father prophesied things that a lot of people didn't believe, and so many people, and they still do, make issue about television. But he said the time will come, and this is before we heard of computers. He said the time will come that you'll be required. He told this to me. I don't know who else he told. The time will come when you will be required to have a television in your home. No one had heard of a computer. But he said that will be a requirement. And a generation or two after he died, all the way just 20 years ago or so, I remember my daughter was in high school. And I said, the other Sunday, I asked all the children about gifts that were special. I might have preached here too about gifts, I can't remember. And how special they are. And I asked them, what kind of gifts? What are gifts special? And some said notebooks, laptops, and they told all of of those for my children. I said, do you know why? I said, they didn't exist. Times have changed. But we want to walk with God. And just since the last year or two, many other things have changed. And you have people that every creation, there are those that seek to master it to manipulate you. So you want to walk with God. And God can direct and guide your steps. And he will do that for us today. But the key is seeking to hear what God is saying. And I spent a lot of time teaching my children to hear me when they're just little children. I didn't worry about other people. There are some people that thought I was too strict, and some thought I wasn't strict enough. I didn't worry about either one. But I did seek to be guided by God in raising my children. So when I said their name, no matter what was going on, I expected them to respond to me. And I had a situation where I even taught them if there was a distance where it wasn't appropriate to call their name, I would snap my fingers, just snap them. And I was in our auditorium there in town. My son was going there to perform, and he needed a particular kind of, they were dressed up, several schools. And I didn't have a shirt for him, but I knew a store that had it. I went and bought it. And I said, now, how do I get his attention? He's sitting up there on the first or second row, and I was halfway back on the far side. I thought, I don't have any of my little children here to go up there and get it. And I just snapped my finger one time. He did just like this. He snapped it once, because he knew nobody else did that but me. And he immediately came, put his shirt on, and was ready to perform. Well, it's important that we teach our children to hear just like we teach ourselves to hear God. Then we can do the right thing. We can be directed by God. He does care about us. And he's concerned about our well-being. It doesn't matter. People might say, well, Sister Alice, you don't have much money. You don't have this or that. I've never worried much about that at all. Because what I'm worried about is whether I'm connected with God. And if God is directing my steps, he will help me do the right thing. And he will help me understand a purity and clarity that comes from God. And he's faithful. Well, that's right. As of yesterday, I'm 65 years old. And so for 55 years, hallelujah, he has directed my steps. He is a God who is as particular and as precise. And he makes me look like I'm brilliant because I'm following him, just like he did Noah. He's able to do that for all of us. He knows where we are. May God help us. May he bless us. May he encourage us. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about people making fun of me. I'm God's child. Don't even waste energy there. The people of God are precious. And as I said, to be in the house of God when it's empty is a privilege. And it's a major bonus when people of God are in here together. May God encourage your heart to follow him and to know that your well-being, when we have every electronics known to man, and sometimes they touch our lives, God is still watching out for us. He is able. He loves us. He's still God of the universe. And we can rebuke electronics just like we rebuke anything else. If it needs to. If it needs to stop. God is able. So we are thankful. And we are thankful. I remember when my husband was alive, he'd weld big heavy beams of steel. Most people don't see steel that thick up close. And when you understand that at times he laid his hands on Predator, it's even more amazing. But he did. And the Lord will bless him to have perfection. God will do that for us. Pray for us.